Hi, this is Stephen Carson coming at you from St. Louis, Missouri, in these United States. Very happy after many months to have Mr. Blackhorse back with us. Hello, sir.
How are you?
Pretty good. I'm wondering, what does it do to a Canadian to have a few months of, warmth and sun and what are you like
Well, my
now?
skin is a few shades darker.
Okay, there you go.
No, it was a nice summer.
Good.
I tried to take as much of it off of the online world as I could while I waited to find out whether Carney was gonna how hard Carney was gonna go on
Yeah.
online commentary.
Yeah. How's it looking?
Um, you know, he's tremendously politically weak.
Hmm.
Um, but at the moment, really the only thing that you can't do, and you really can't do,
Hmm.
is get into one of the domestic political feuds that's going on here.
Right. Okay.
Um,
So
I
commenting
wondered
on
whether he
commenting
would.
on affairs outside of Canada is probably pretty much fair game, is what you're
Yeah,
saying.
well, I wondered whether he'd go hard after the Gaza people, but they're
Hmm.
too big a part of his political coalition, so
They're safe
um,
for now.
they're safe at the
Got it.
moment. So, anyways, I was curious to see how it would come out. It so far, Twitter still exists in Canada, just barely, and there hasn't actually been a lot of people who have gone down since he came in. So it's good.
Yeah, and we had thought that they might actually block off Twitter altogether earlier in the year, as I recall. Right.
Yeah, his government talked about that on the way in. But so far his government has been able to pass absolutely nothing.
Hmm.
Um, so it's no news is good news, I guess.
Do you mean to be in the chat as Red Ensign, by the way?
Yeah,
Okay.
I I haven't figured out how to.
Switch back and
Uh,
forth.
yeah, exactly.
Okay. Yeah, if you see Red Ensign in the chat, that's Black Horse. It also serves as advertising for his podcast and articles and so forth that are there or that he organizes there. Um, okay, we'll pretty much get right into it. Support gratefully received for this show at Subscribestar. Link is on YouTube. If you're on Twitter, go over the YouTube video description, you'll see it. And that's all I need to say. Before we get into it, we have a short amount of time, so we're going to rock. We're going to talk about the U.S. domestically first and then internationally.
Yeah, I wanted
So,
to do like a take the temperature of the gay as the first kind of step back. How does the picture look for the US domestically? How does it look for the imperial footprint? What can we kind of conclude from that about the years to come? Um, so the first place to start or here is to look at the Trump administration from a domestic point of view, and we're really looking at um, not one of the pieces here that we're looking at will be a hot button rhetoric issue. This is the dollars and cents of how things are going, and the first place to start is in this big fight that's been going on between Trump, the um, what do they call it? It's the Department of Statistics inside the BLS, the Bureau of Labor
Bureau of Labor
Statistics,
Statistics. Yeah, yeah.
and the Federal Reserve are locked in this three-way war about uh, how to represent various items. Um,
How best to highlight the wonderful news of what's happening under the Trump administration is basically what you're saying,
well,
right?
yeah, exactly, and whether to the this crescendoed around a couple of different issues. One of them is whether to backdate the revisions in the employment statistics into the Biden administration or not, right? So I believe right now you're showing the chart of the changes in jobs, the various jobs reports that have gone back for a couple of years.
Yeah, and by the way, if you look at Ninja, there I am sharing my what you should be able to see what I'm showing everyone.
Yes, I can
Yeah.
see.
Okay. Yeah.
Um,
Right.
so you can see that there's an original series and a revised series, and the original series and the revised series are about 1 million jobs different, right?
Just that. Yeah.
So somewhere between 2023 and the end of 2024, uh, someone misplaced 1 million lost jobs. Um, the head of the BLS eventually lost her job over this, and the
Oh,
decision was made to after she lost her job to backdate the revisions so that they're 2024 and 2023 revisions rather than originally they were going to make them 2025 revisions, right? So this is what this fight was all about, whether or not these are jobs that failed to materialize during the Trump administration and is therefore Trump's fault, or whether they're jobs that failed to materialize during the Biden administration and therefore Biden's job.
right. So
uh,
we were in danger of getting something like the I guess the reverse of the 2020 votes coming in, right? Just this drop right when Trump gets in office or something like that,
yeah, exactly.
which wouldn't be quite fair, it looks like.
Well, I mean, it's a big fight over how to count, right?
Yeah.
And as you know, if you've ever set foot inside a place like the Bureau of Labor Statistics, there are an infinitude of tricks to manage perception. And Trump fired the head of the department, and magically the revisions were 2023 and 2024 revisions. Whether that's true or not, God only knows.
Oh,
But
I see. Yeah,
uh,
yeah. Okay.
that's how it came out. Now, the other thing to really notice about this chart is any way you slice or dice the revisions, the jobs numbers for the last 2 years, really going back to 2024, have been pretty weak. Um, so the employment picture in the U.S. is a lot weaker than previously advertised, which comes to the other part of this big fight, which is the big fight with the Fed, because the Trump administration has been continually making the case to the Federal Reserve that they should cut interest rates because the economy is weaker than the Federal Reserve thinks it is, right? And so the jobs numbers being revised downwards is part of making the case that the Federal Reserve should lower interest rates. Um, the undertone of this is that the Trump administration's coming 4 years are at risk of being strangled by the cost of amortizing the U.S. debt load. Um, and the Trump administration, for better or for worse, doesn't want to cut spending. They want to increase spending. The big
Hmm.
beautiful bill was one of the largest increases in spending in U.S. government history.
Yeah.
Um, and in order to do that, they want the Federal Reserve to cooperate and to lower short-term interest rates and to buy bonds or at least not sell bonds. And they're fighting over the Bureau of Labor Statistics to make the case to the Fed governors that the Federal Reserve should cooperate. Um, in the
This is
meantime,
interesting. I'm used to Trump always being like, everything's so great under me, and this is for various reasons. He's actually trying to sell a different story and say things are bad. Please help.
yeah, well, he's trying to say like he's trying to argue that there's no risk of inflation if the Fed cut goes back to basically the zero bound,
I see. Uh-huh.
right? And so trying to force the revisions through in the job numbers um, is part of making that case. There are a number of other metrics that you'll see quite a lot of revisions and quite a lot of fighting over at the BLS, and a lot of people have been fired over at the BLS to try to. Um, I mean, I'm not taking a side in that particular fight, but certainly to try to get the numbers that Trump wants in order to support an interest rate cut.
Right. Yeah. Is this partisan bureaucrats of the deep state versus heroic Trump, or is it honest statisticians trying to do their job versus Trump who's trying to fool everyone with the stats or something? Right.
Yeah, it's hard to say exactly which is going on, but there's definitely I would bet on a little bit of both. And to understand why the Trump administration is so after this, I wanted to flip and look at the yield curve for a minute.
I never brought up the headline: Trump fires Commissioner of Labor Statistics after weaker than expected jobs figures slam markets. Anyway, you just
Yeah, yeah.
explained it. Anyway, on to the 10-year Treasury, right?
Yep. So
Yeah.
the 10-year is probably the more well managed element of this, but you can see that basically since Trump took over, it's sitting around the 4% range,
Hmm.
which means that the US is having to refinance its debt at 4%. I think the US debt is something like 30 to 40 trillion now. 30 to 4, whatever it is, 35 trillion times 4% is a big number.
Yeah.
It's like it's like 1.8 trillion, like
Right.
50% of the budget would be required to pay interest if you had to refinance at these rates.
Yeah.
Um, so there's a lot of inflation that the US government can export because of the position of the dollar, but um, it's getting difficult to sell bonds uh, with unless the Federal Reserve cooperates and is willing to buy back bonds. And if we flip to the 30-year, we can see a similar pattern, and we can see it running right up until the last couple of weeks when Trump finally got the labor secretary fired, and the market finally uh, has taken the view that Trump is going to be able to get the Federal Reserve to cooperate. So bond yields have come in anticipation of the Federal Reserve um, either buying or at least not selling bonds onto the market. Um, so that's what's going on there. Really, really profoundly important indicator of whether or not we're going to get zero interest rate policy is this war that's going on inside the BLS, and to a lesser extent, I mean, Trump has tried to threaten Jerome Powell directly.
I
I think
remember.
it's interesting that despite his threats, the Trump administration has not dismissed a single Fed governor.
Mm.
Um, so, uh, I try to stay out of Kremlinology of the Trump administration, but the backward-looking view here is that if there's a struggle, there's a if there's a struggle between the two entities, there's a kind of détente at the moment. Um, so we'll kind of have to see how that comes out.
Okay. I'm going to tell you what I've got next. Hopefully, it's right. Trump Pentagon weighing equity stakes in defense contractors like Lockheed.
Oh yes, this is a huge policy shift
Yeah.
uh, that really needs to be pointed out here. So the Trump administration is how to historically contextualize this. They're formalizing the integration between the military industrial complex and the U.S. government, right?
Yeah.
So
This
there's
is
a
the old. This is
collection
the
of
old big government, big business thing, except they're not even pretending anymore. Is what this would be, right?
Well, I think a lot of what you're seeing in the early Trump administration is a decision not to pretend anymore, right? So, if you look at the way that the tariff arguments have been made, uh, there's no pretense that that the American empire is not trying to extract tribute. It's very explicit. It's an attempt explicitly to tax these kind of vassal states, and in the same way. Um, it's presented as defense contractors, but this goes through a very wide collection of entities that are closely associated with the U.S. government. Um, you, if you go
I'm
in, there's
sorry. Beyond the military-industrial complex.
well, there are items that you wouldn't ordinarily think of as part of the military industrial complex. So a lot of the recipients of CHIPS Act funding are on this list as well. But you wouldn't ordinarily think of Intel as a defense contractor.
Oh, wait. Oh, they're going to take an equity stake in Intel. Did I miss that?
Yeah, they're
Wow.
thinking about taking 10%. Like, these are not
Oh,
just
oh,
equity
there it
stakes,
is.
these are very significant equity stakes, um, that they're looking at. So, it's not all a done deal yet what's going to happen here, but this is a profound change, in, um I mean, this is not something that the US government, would have done under any administration in the post-war era, until Trump. So it's
Yeah.
worth
So real quick. I know we're a little short on time, but what does this mean? I mean, given that it's sort of just acknowledging the way things really have been from a certain point of view. I mean, do you really see that structural change as portending anything in particular beyond just dropping the pretense?
Yeah, I mean, um, there are different ways of looking at it. Um, on the one hand, it's dropping the pretense. On
Yeah.
the other hand, by dropping the pretense, it's really um, so one of the advantages of being an independent defense contractor in the American empire is that you could uh, make the argument that you should be able to sell to every government in that empire and that you're arm's length from the U.S. government, and so
Mm,
it's not part of your relationship with the U.S. government how many planes you buy from Boeing, right?
okay.
So, uh, as the US government formalizes their relationship with these defense contractors, it's going to get harder and harder for the US government to conceal its um, demands for cash from its vassal states, right?
Mm,
Because there'll be
hmm.
payments directly to USG rather than payments to Boeing, who's a totally independent company that has nothing to do with
Right,
the US government, right?
right, right.
Um, so there's some value in the formalization of that relationship. Formalism is good in that it creates a certain kind of, it reduces the distortion field around reality. You get
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
more
You,
intelligent discussions.
you see where the buck
On the other,
stops. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. On the other hand, um, I think it portends an end to this very. I mean, my position is that um, you're looking at an attempt to really increase the amount of economic value extracted from the imperial assets of the American Empire.
Hmm.
Um, uh, in part because the empire is kind of struggling with its rivals,
Yeah.
um, and the consequences of that are going to be complicated. In this video, I'm going to kind of argue that the consequences are very different right now in Europe than they are in East Asia. In East
Hmm.
Asia, there's a kind of an attempt to shrug off the Americans and
Hmm.
not participate in this. Basically, if the cost is going to go up to be part of the American bloc, we just won't be part of the American bloc anymore,
Right, right.
right?
So
Whereas the
a
Europeans
pulling in a bit of the U.S. empire effectively.
Yeah, whereas the Europeans are struggling with how to react to any of this.
Hmm.
Um, there's an instinct to become servile and to think that that's going to make it go away,
Oh,
um, right? But there's also like an attempt to um, make the argument that Trump is like an unworthy king of the American empire because he's being abusive in this way.
hmm.
Um, it's just they're trying to politic within the structure of the American empire rather than trying to politic
Or to
by
leave.
leveraging leaving it.
All right, right.
Um,
I mean, could it
which
just
is
be bad news for people who live in these vassal states? I mean, we've already
well,
seen
it's
some
just
things in Europe that have not been great for the people there, right?
I just think it depends where you live. I think it's bad news
Mm,
for the economic situation if you live in one of the states that's not going to break away, and if you
right.
live in one of the states where it's possible to leverage the threat of breaking away, then it probably affects you a lot less.
Hmm. Gotcha. Okay, well, let's keep rolling. Next one, short run effects of 2025 tariffs so far. And there's a bunch of key takeaways. I think you highlighted number one in particular. New
Yeah,
2025 tariffs have raised 88 billion in revenue. New tariffs responsible for about 23 billion in revenues in August alone. Yeah,
yeah.
and
So
in a
I
previous
want to
show, we
focus
tried
on
to put this in perspective because that sounds like a lot, but is it a lot?
well, I want to focus on 23 billion a month because there's been
Okay.
a lot of back and forth about what the tariffs are going to be. They seem to be more settled at this point. So if we take the 23 billion a month figure as indicative of the cash that they're actually going to be able to raise, that represents like 280 billion a year.
Right.
Um,
Annualized, right?
so you're talking like less like 7-8% of the US budget. So, or the revenue side of the U.S. budget even less, more like 4 or 5% of the expense side of the U.S. budget.
Right.
So, um, on the one hand, a 7-8% increase in the revenue line of a business is that's serious money. On the other hand, we're not transforming the financial situation. We're not abolishing the income tax.
Right.
Uh, right.
Yeah.
None of that stuff is going to happen. So that it's just worth kind of understanding what the domestic fiscal consequences of this are likely to be. I also had some charts there where I wanted to look at the consequences of this for the price of goods in the United States.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay. Sorry. There's a federal revenue versus spending.
oh yeah, I just wanted to have that there to
Okay.
contextualize, uh, like 280 billion a year.
Right.
That's you know the budget is almost 5 trillion, so 280 billion is actually almost 7 trillion now. Wow.
Yeah. Right.
So it's even smaller than I would have represented there, from memory. So it's quite small compared to. I mean, we're talking about less than half of the revenue from corporate tax. Um,
Right.
so we're not talking about something that's going to transform the U.S. economic situation.
Right. And then we've got core goods price level. Hope we're not jumping
Yeah. So
around too
this is
much here.
part of the yeah this is part of the big fight, with uh, that BLS, Fed, and the Trump administration are having right now,
Mm-hmm.
because for goods that are sensitive to the tariff, we've actually already seen pretty sharp indications of inflation in the US,
Mm-hmm.
even before rate cuts have come. So the Federal Reserve is looking at this as an early indication of potentially rapidly accelerating inflation as a consequence of the trade situation.
Making them not
Um,
want to cut rates like Trump wants them to do.
Exactly. So
Yeah. Yeah.
these things are all kind of tangled together in the domestic fight over how this is going to come out. Um,
Mm-hmm.
the path the Trump administration appears to want to cut runs directly into the teeth of likely severe inflation. So whether they'll get their way and that those conditions will come together, remains to be seen. There are still courts trying to argue that that Trump doesn't actually have the power to apply tariffs, and then he has to pay all the money back to the countries he's taken it from. Um, which
Okay.
is, I mean, that's not off the wall. The U.S. Court of Appeals said that the money has to be sequestered for potential repayment.
Wow.
Um, this is going to have to go to the Supreme Court. I assume that the Supreme Court is not going to take that outcome, but it's very much a live fight, how that's going to come out.
Yeah, yeah, I'm very confused by this maybe I just didn't understand which body was officially doing it, but as you probably know, the federal government was funded by tariffs for the first half of the existence of the country. So
Right.
this isn't like
The
some novel
argument,
thing, you know?
the argument from the court is pretty straightforward. Uh, Tariffs, if they're a tax, need to be passed by Congress. Tariffs, if they're a sanctions package as part of foreign affairs, do
Hmm.
not need to be passed by Congress. They can be executed by the executive branch, right?
Okay.
And so a lot of the rhetoric that comes out of the Trump administration is intended to manage this legal issue, because if they can argue it's part of foreign policy, then they have the right to do whatever, basically whatever they want. Whereas if this is intended as a long-term source of finance for the government, like a genuine tax, then they should really have a bill through Congress. And I'm not making a prediction as to what the court will ultimately say. Um, I would a lot of tariffs have been imposed by the executive branch in the 19 period beginning in 1980.
Hmm.
Um, but it's an issue that's out there, right?
Yeah. More
And
effects. Oh, go ahead.
I
Sorry.
don't. Well, the last point I want to make is I don't think that it's certainly not a foregone conclusion that if Trump had to go to Congress to get the tariffs as they exist passed and get the tariffs passed every time he wants to change them, I think it would cripple that policy. Right, that
Hmm.
ruling would force a lot of change.
Yep. Next, we've got tariff sensitive manufacturing payroll employment.
Yeah. So this is the other piece. Um, the tariffs have caused an increase in productivity in American manufacturing, but they have not caused an increase in payrolls. In
Hmm.
fact, payrolls in tariff sensitive industries in the United States have actually declined during the period in question.
Huh.
Um, so uh, this is. Um, it's hard to really I mean, it's we don't have a lot of data. We have this giant fight at the BLS, so it's hard to know whether we can really trust the data. But this is a real blow to the Trump administration's strategy here in a short-term sense. He's really going to want to be able to show employment gains out of reshoring, and
Yeah.
he's not been able to show employment gains to this point.
Hmm. And then also you had tariff sensitive industrial production, which is up, right?
Yes. So this is interesting. The uh, productivity, which is easier to measure, right? It's easier to note exactly how many goods are hitting market because of the
Hmm.
way that those work, than it is to see employment numbers. And productivity, or sorry, not productivity, actual production has gone up much more sharply, actually quite sharply, in contrast to the very weak employment numbers in manufacturing.
Right, which shows productivity and the original word you were using,
Yes.
efficient production, right? Uh, Producing more with less people, which normally is would be considered good, right? But
Yeah, I
maybe
mean, normally would
politically
be
isn't
considered
politically
good.
isn't what Trump wants.
Yes, Trump wants every one of those goods made in the US to result in a job for his coalition, right? So he
Right.
can go back and say, "Look what I did for you."
Yeah.
And that has not yet. That there's no evidence that that's occurred yet at
Right.
this point.
Okay. And then I think the final. No, no. This is okay.
Yeah,
Anything
so
else
that's
on
the
domestic?
end of
Because I think we're about to switch to international. So.
that's the end of domestic. I mean, what do we say about this? We have this incredibly thick political fight uh, over elements of U.S. government economic policy that were previously consensus elements. Um, and it's unclear to me exactly whether there's going to be a permanent shift in policy or not.
Hmm.
Um, I also think that it's very unclear that the permanent shift in policy being described, it's unclear whether it's going to be good for the U.S. economy in the medium term, or whether it's even close to sufficient to kind of um, steer the ship. Let's put it that way.
Hmm. Okay. So ready to turn to international?
Yeah.
All right. So this is where, for the first time since the mid 90s, gold holdings by central banks outside of the United States have exceeded, I guess, in value, right, holdings of US treasuries as part of their reserves.
That's correct.
So this is
So,
a 30 year 30 years ago was the last time this happened. The gold, they were holding more gold than treasuries. What does that mean? And how was it that it was that way for, it looks like, for decades before 1995? They had lots of gold.
well, so this is basically a measure of the power of the U.S. dollar
Mm.
over uh, in, internationally. Um, Foreign central banks are obviously not the only holders of U.S. dollars internationally,
Hmm.
but they're a very, very important source of international demand for U.S. treasuries.
Right.
Um, and through the period between 1980 and maybe 2000, the US government was extremely successful at convincing foreign governments to replace their gold holdings with US treasuries, right?
Hmm.
This this substantially increased the power of the dollar and increased the ability of the United States government to export inflation internationally. Um, so if you look at the strategy we just reviewed, where the Trump administration is doing things that without the special properties of the US dollar would be highly inflationary. Um, that strategy is predicated on the special position of the US dollar and the ability to export inflation,
Right.
right? This is why I call it an increase in the sort of taxes implicit in being part of the American empire,
Hmm.
because the more that you create inflation on the US dollar, the more you effectively tax all of these other entities that hold US dollars. Now, it's very important when making that calculation to notice that foreign holdings, foreign central bank holdings of US dollars are in steep decline. And it's very obvious that some of those foreign central banks have made a conscious decision to replace US dollar holdings with gold holdings, right? Holdings of assets not linked to the US dollar.
Right. Hard money advocates rejoice.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is a sign of very ill health for the American empire. And if
Right.
you dig into um, the particulars of it, uh, a big milestone in this is the Russia-Ukraine war, but it goes back before that,
Yeah.
and it has the number one issue is China's and India's shift away from holding U.S. dollars towards holding gold.
Yeah. I mean, I remember Peter Schiff. I'm sure you've heard his name.
Yes.
I remember him back in the 90s or something talking about, hey, we can't keep getting goods from China and giving them pieces of green paper, you know. He was highlighting how, I guess at that point, he was noticing how successfully they were getting, China to hold uh, treasuries, right?
Well,
And it sounds like India was in that game as well, and now both very, very large population countries at least, and increasingly economic, large economically. You're saying they're getting out
yeah,
of the game.
the five,
They're trending out of the game.
yeah, exactly. Two of the five largest economies in the world,
Yeah.
um, depending on how you measure.
Right.
Um, Exiting that relationship, that's a really bad sign for the strategy of exporting inflation via U.S. dollars. So I think that's a really important measure to keep an eye on.
Yeah.
Um,
Right. Because if you look at it and you sort of extend the lines outward, you're back to where we were before 1995, right? With
yeah,
treasuries
exactly.
a much smaller percentage relative to gold. We have too little to go on to say that that's where we're going to end up in a few years, right? But
Y-
let's see.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
Um, so
Okay,
uh,
so your next item brings up the diplomatic thing, which has really gotten my attention. Um, I'll read what Russians with Attitude said about this in a moment, but I noticed this issue where the UN decided to not meet in New York, which has happened once before. In both cases, the previous case was Yasser Arafat. In this case, it also has to do with the Palestinian delegation, with the U.S. government not allowing them to come to the United States because New York is in the United States, even though UN is special status or whatever. You still have to fly into a U.S. airport to go to a meeting, a UN meeting in New York. Well, the U.S. wasn't going to let the Palestinians in, and so the UN said, "Well, we're just going to meet somewhere else." They did
yeah,
this before. It's not completely unprecedented, but it's extremely rare. And to me, it seems like you're really rolling the dice with your diplomatic credibility when you do stuff like that, right? And of course, there's been a lot of that sort of thing going on with Trump, I think.
yeah. Well, I think it's worth reading the tweet and
Yeah,
reflecting on. We've all been focused on Mr. Kirk and the
yeah,
whatever the lady on the bus
arena.
was,
Yeah.
but there was another, shall we say, significant political murder that
Yes.
happened this week.
this week. Yeah, it's hard to keep up. So I'll read both. First, they said so. Apparently, the Israelis bombed Hamas leadership while they were debating the latest diplomatic proposal from the U.S. on how to end the Gaza war. I've lost count of how many times they've now used pretend negotiations as cover for assassinations and bombings. And then later they add, Trump's latest ceasefire proposal was literally just a trap to get the Hamas political bureau to gather in Doha to kill them. It's not the first time something like this has happened. Is there any point in engaging in diplomacy or negotiations with the US? And of course, what comes to mind is what happened with Iran, right?
Yeah.
Where many people viewed that the US essentially sort of tricked Iran into the
Well,
situation with Israel
the U.S.
attacking them.
Was operating a diplomatic negotiation right up until the minute that Israel attempted a decapitation strike of the entire Iranian government.
Yeah,
Um, in this case, the U.S. entertains a negotiation with Hamas, and Israel succeeds in executing a decapitation strike of their, I guess, provisional government, whatever you want to call the
mm-hmm.
Hamas leadership. Um, this is the same tactic played over again. Um, and not only is it the same tactic played over again, it's being noticed and pointed out by all of these countries that are kind of at the edge of the American sphere of influence. Um, what do you say about this?
Well, what's the effect on the long run prognosis for the empire, right? Because this is a little bit of the fox versus wolf, fox versus lion thing we talk about.
Yeah,
Diplomacy is the fox way to keep the empire rolling, right? And what they're doing is they're shooting the foxes in the head with these kinds of behaviors, right? Um, and leaving themselves only one option, which is hard power, which isn't necessarily great. Maybe it works in the short term, but probably isn't great for the long term prospects.
yeah. I mean, uh, what I said on Twitter as a response to this is, you wonder why the Ukraine war uh, couldn't be ended diplomatically. This kind of thing is why, right? Um, the U.S. government um, has essentially taken diplomacy out of their arsenal in dealing with foreign powers
Right.
at the very moment that its relative power compared to its competitors is declining.
Yeah.
Um, so, you know, um, it's a bold
What is
move.
that?
We'll see
What's
how it turns out.
exactly? That's what I was just going to say. Bold move. Let's see how it turns out. Okay. Next one. How's it looking, by the way? Do we literally have 10 minutes?
Yeah, it looks like we'll be okay.
We'll be okay. Okay. Well, I'll calm
Yeah,
down a little. We'll probably be done in about 10 minutes, but if we go over, it
yeah,
seems like
yeah.
it's okay. Okay. So little hard to read this one. Share of international payments via SWIFT by currency, where the blue at the bottom, the light blue at the bottom is USD,
Yeah.
and it
So we
looks
were
like
tracking this very closely at the
it's got a
start.
bigger share over the last few years.
Yeah, so we were tracking this very closely at the time of the outbreak of the Russo-Ukraine war,
Right.
mostly because the euro. This was a milestone in the decline of the euro as a country, as a currency of international exchange. I
Mm,
wanted to reference this because uh, SWIFT is the uh, payments engine for any country that's kind of marginally associated with the gay. Um,
hmm
it's not the payments engine that China and and India use to communicate with each other,
Russia got kicked
but
out of it, in fact.
Russia
Right.
got kicked out of it,
Yeah.
very notably. Um, but within the American empire, the power of the the relative power of the U.S. dollar continues to grow, right?
hmm
So it's only these states that are actually exiting the American empire that are the American sphere of influence that are ditching the dollar within the bubble of those who will not exit the American sphere of influence. The relative power of the U.S. dollar is growing. So
Right.
even though we earlier said that the absolute power of the U.S. dollar to export inflation is declining, um, that's because of the situation with Russia, China, and India. That's not because of the relationship with any of the kind of what you would call harder vassals of the U.S. government of the kind of U.S. empire. So within the bubble of countries that are staying inside the empire, the U.S. dollar is becoming a more powerful tool a more powerful tool rather than less powerful tool.
Right, and the Star Wars quote comes to mind: "The more you tighten your grip, the more star systems will slip through your fingers." What do I mean by that? I mean that it seems like staying inside is becoming a worse deal. Is that
Yes.
an unfair summary?
Yeah, I mean, I made this comparison at the time to Darth Vader at Cloud City. I'm altering the deal. Pray I don't alter it any further.
There you go.
Uh, this is the way that this is the kind of the trend of the evolution of the relationship between America and its vassal states,
Yeah.
and the results of that change in trend is very different depending on the strategic position of those states. So there's a big thread this week on the response in Korea to
Hmm.
the ice raid on the Hyundai facility carried out by the
In
Trump
the
administration.
U.S., there is a Hyundai facility in the U.S. and they
Well,
did an
it's a
immigration
little
raid
bit
on it, right?
more complicated than that. So the Hyundai
Oh.
facility that was being built in the US was a concession extracted by the Trump administration in the trade negotiation with Korea. So one of the things the Trump administration has repeatedly asked countries in trade negotiations is to make investments in the US.
Right.
Well, the Korean government gets Hyundai to commit to this big putting this big plant in the US. Um, they can't or won't use US engineers to do it.
Hmm.
So they illegally bring their their Korean engineers to America and to try to build this plant, and then they get
Yeah.
arrested and deported. Um, and the Korean government just goes ballistic. You have
Right.
like full spectrum Korean news about how this is like a deep diplomatic insult to Korea, and
Yeah.
you know, very similar to what we saw in Canada during the height of the sort of 51st state rhetoric, where there's just apoplexy in the local media. Um, I just think it's important to understand. Um, I don't know whether whether South Korea is in a position where it would actually forgo its relationship with the United States.
Mm.
It's got a
Yeah.
very dangerous neighbor
Right.
in
North
China, North
Korea.
Korea,
Yeah.
that it would have to totally reorganize its relationship with in order to leave the American empire.
Right.
Um, so the question is like, how much leverage do you have in each situation? If the U.S. government didn't have maximum leverage over Korea, they'd be a candidate for leaving tomorrow, like Japan is.
Yeah.
Um, and it's just country by country, you go down the list and look at the rearticulation of these relationships, and everybody who can leave is attempting to.
Yeah. And one of the things I remember from that thread is it highlighted how this was not a partisan issue politically in Korea. All parties, from the far left to the far right and everything in between, everybody was agreed that this was absolutely insulting and horrible. And so one could say there was a national or popular, as a people, as a Korean people, they were really bothered by this. Right.
Yes, yeah, yeah. And that's what I say. You've gotten this in several countries that have had um, that have rubbed the wrong way with the Trump administration, where issues which are like a news cycle in the U.S. are like um, they're generationally altering the viewpoint of people in those nations towards the United States, and
Right. Yeah. So
like
maybe it doesn't mean they exit tomorrow, but as a new generation of leadership rises up, they're like, you know, why are we in this deal?
well, there's a
Right.
really famous interview from Lee Kuan Yew
Mm.
where he talks about how the loss of the British Army to the Japanese during the Second World War convinced him that the British were unworthy to rule Singapore, right?
Mm.
And these kinds of events have generational consequences that are hard to specifically foresee.
Right.
But these are the kinds of events that cause empires to fray. Um,
Yeah.
and you know, in America, the Hyundai plant is like it's like a pro-Trump news cycle that lasts 12 hours and then it's done. Right? It's
Hmm.
not a significant issue, but it's easy to forget that there are other people in the world who, you know, are reacting differently to seeing the same news and reacting very differently.
Yeah. Yes. Right. And the thing that we have already forgotten about, they're going to be thinking about for some time to come.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Then you've got the famous picture of the pretty much all the European leaders. Actually, the UK's not here. So was it EU leaders before Trump?
Yeah, Canada's not here, Britain's not here, everybody
Okay.
else is here.
Yeah.
Um, and the famous quote for this from Fisted by Foucault is Europe's century of humiliation is just getting started.
Hmm.
Um, I think it's important to understand how this is again perceived, right? This is the EU coming to Washington looking for what the New Deal is going to be. These are all the little functionaries of the American empire who rule over their local countries, and they're all there trying to figure out what it is they can do in order to be in the right position in the new order that they expect to come down. The
Yeah.
problem the Trump administration has got with these people is twofold. First, they can't promise a durable new order because the red blue conflict in America is still too strong for them to look like they're in total control.
Yeah.
Um, and the second issue is that all they're offering is stick. There's no carrot, right?
Hmm.
Um, so there's nowhere in any of this speech is you do something for me and here look at all the great things we're going to do for you.
Hmm.
There's only the tax. It might as well be like a lecture about how your taxes are going up
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
everyone there except Mr. Zelensky.
Yeah. I mean, at one time, well, right, Zelensky aside, at one time it would have been, hey, we've got your back in the Cold War with the Soviet Union. We'll protect you from the communist hordes coming over the border, right? That could be viewed as getting something out of the relationship. But what does Trump have to offer Germany or France right now, right?
Yeah, you can buy more from our defense contractors, is what he
Right.
has to offer at the moment.
Yeah, yeah. Anyway, so I think as you explained to me, the point of this picture is to show the Europeans in a relatively servile position and contrast with this. And here we have Times of India. U.S. has long benefited from free trade. Chinese envoy slams 50% tariffs on India, calls them unfair, unreasonable. So that's interesting. So this is China criticizing the tariffs on India, therefore diplomatically acting as a sort of as an ally to India, right?
Well, what's happening here is you have India leaving the American sphere of influence and entering the Chinese sphere of influence. So
Got it.
this is what's happening to marginal countries at the edge of the gay that can leave. India is an example. The Trump administration proposed a new deal. India said no, thank you, and
Mm-hmm.
found a different partner.
Yeah.
And if you go and read the Indian media, this is one of what could have been 20 or 30 articles highlighting China as uh, essentially the replacement market for America
Mm-hmm.
um, in what Modi is kind of proposing here. So, in some ways, the Trump administration's effort to raise the taxes on the vassals has turned BRICS, just like the Russia sanctions solidified the Brazil Russia or the Russia India China bloc to some degree.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the tariffs have been another solidifying agent for this block of countries. Uh, you know, Russia, India, China together are an enormously powerful economic engine to
Yeah.
sit on the other side of um, the border of the American empire.
Yeah. And you know, you lose a billion people here, a billion people there. Soon enough, your
Sooner or
empire's
later, it starts to add up to real money. You know.
yeah, your empire starts to feel not so expansive anymore, right? Because just to remind everyone, the vision of the unipolar moment that was explicitly articulated by generals or Pentagon people or whatever was full spectrum dominance. The U.S. empire will be the dominant power. It will be the single great power and will be the dominant power in every region of the world, whether it's Asia or Europe or South America or whatever. That was the vision. And what we're seeing with the war in Ukraine and now with China and India and Russia sort of forming their own trade bloc is that the US is that full spectrum dominance vision is falling apart before our eyes, I would say. I mean, am I being hyperbolic?
No, this is the end of George W. Bush Sr.'s New World Order, right? So
Yeah,
uh, the effort to integrate Russia, China, and India into the American empire and forge a unipolar world and an enduring empire that will last 1,000 years. Uh, it's over. Um, and now we're scrambling to figure out what the international borders are actually going to be between these two emerging blocks, and whether it's going to be two emerging blocks or whether it's going to be more than two emerging blocks. Um, so that's the world we're going into, um, and I think it really reframes the U.S. domestic situation because um, the pool of other economies into which the U.S. Might be able to export its inflation has just gotten a lot smaller.
right.
Right at the moment where the U.S. government is hoping to turn that mechanism up into hyperdrive. Um, that's a big problem. It's not a problem for tomorrow morning. It might not even be a problem for 2 years from now,
Hmm.
but that is a really big problem structurally for the U.S. empire. Um, and apart from their apparent hope that AI is gonna like make work unnecessary or something, I don't see any other way out of. I don't see any way out of this problem for them.
Okay, I was just seeing if there's any. Yeah, I don't see anything I want to respond to in terms of chats and stuff. Um, right. So, any other comments on the international situation?
No, that's really all I wanted to catch up
Yeah, well, thanks. Thanks for coming back and peeking your head above the parapet of the Great Wall of Canada or whatever.
on.
I hope it's okay for you. Uh, I think we were pretty safe in what we talked about today. General observations on where things are going. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, and I guess a couple things, in our tradition of keeping our eye on certain stories, a couple things we'll want to continue to keep our eye on, right? That you brought up today. Will they continue to shift into gold and away from treasuries, or is that just a strange little blip? Or are we seeing really the beginning of a big trend? Not sure when we can make that determination. In a year or something? I don't know. Uh, Go ahead.
yeah. I mean, it's a trend that at the moment is parabolically accelerating.
Yeah,
Uh, so
that's
I
what it looked
kind of
like.
wonder whether we may see a real problem for the U.S. dollar sometime in the next 18 months. So I want to kind of highlight it here that the three forces coming together: the battle with the Fed, the relatively weak U.S. economy, combined with this enormous surge of spending that the U.S. government wants to engage in at the very time that the international market for their bonds is uh, radically weakening because of
Yeah,
their geopolitical position.
right.
The other players here that are worth noting is that other another traditional huge buyer of U.S. Treasuries is Saudi Arabia in association with their oil industry.
Mm-hmm.
But Saudi Arabia is one of those candidates for leaving the American empire, right? Because
Ooh,
they're not strategically dependent on. I mean, the U.S. and Israelis just fought a stalemate war with Iran, so There's no U.S. military dominance over the Persian Gulf right at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
There's no U.S. military dominance over Suez right at the moment. The canal isn't even open to American or U.S. Shipping.
Right.
Um, and so,
I thought.
and the U.S. is like, there's no good reason why 10 years from now those tankers don't all go east to China and India instead of west to North America.
Right. I thought what the U.S. empire had on Saudi Arabia was literally just troops stationed in Saudi Arabia, but it's unclear to me how whether they can literally hold it in that kind of a way, just
Well,
by occupation.
it's a similar situation to the situation in Korea, where there are American troops there, but the American troops there are a small fraction of the local troops. Most of NATO's presence there is equipment, bases, and air assets.
Hmm.
Um, Remember, Saudi Arabia has been fighting this war with Yemen on and off for a very long time. They've
Yeah.
used a lot of assets purchased from the United States in that war, and used them not very effectively against the Yemenis, who have continued to fight against um, all predictions, or at least all the
Hmm.
predictions that I ever saw.
Yep.
Um,
It's been
there's a
amazing.
lot of shaken confidence in U.S. military capacity in that part of the world at the moment.
Hmm.
Uh, if Iran, Russia, or China can demonstrate greater capacity, I don't see a reason why they don't flip um, in the foreseeable future. And if they
Yep.
flip, the consequences for the U.S. dollar could be um, quite serious.
Yeah, it was called the petrodollar, right? What if the petro
Yeah,
part leaves?
yeah. I mean, I've highlighted that the petrodollar isn't the only thing that keeps the U.S. dollar in its position, but it's definitely a significant element of the way that that system works. So
All right. Well, we should wrap it up. I thank you very much for coming back. Hopefully, we'll get back to a regular rhythm. Um, I think I will be off next week. Yeah, I've got work stuff next week, and unfortunately, that's part of the reason I haven't been as regular as I hope to be as we got back into the fall, because I've had some work stuff keeping me from being at home streaming in the afternoon. Um, but anyway, hopefully, it'll just be one more week, and then I'll be on a nice steady rhythm. Um, and as promised, Black Horse, just wanted to mention for longtime viewers here, I had a technical issue, had a lightning strike, which was a big pain to and expensive to recover from. But as a result of it, we got through the stream with 0 drop frames. So
there we go.
nice,
There we
nice
go.
technical improvement in the show there. Okay, well, thanks very much, Black Horse. Glad to have you back.
Thanks for having me.